After my stepmother Becca framed me for pilfering the college money of my sister Alexa, my dad booted me out of the house. About 8 years ago, when I was 21 and had graduated from college, for a few months I stayed back in with my parents in order to save money for my own apartment. When I was 7, my parents had split. My dad met Becca when I was 17. 4 years younger than me, Becca, a widow, had a daughter called Alexa. Something seemed strange from the first minute I met Becca and Alexa, though I later attributed their lack of apparent interest in me to jitters or discomfort. At the moment, it seemed like something else. A year after my dad began dating, Becca and Alexa moved in with us, but by then I was already away at college. I only visited them on vacations, and every time I returned home, the coldness from Becca and Alexa was difficult to overlook. I noted it considerably more when I went back home for good following graduation. In my own house, I felt like an alien. Becca and Alexa appeared much more content when it was just the three of them: my dad, Becca, and Alexa. Said the least, it was strange. When I finally took this up with my dad, telling him how unwelcome I felt, he dismissed it, stating I was dreaming that Becca and Alexa loved me. I stayed expecting things would turn around and chose to treat him with the benefit of the doubt. Still, I knew I was correct not long afterward. Alexa went out of her way to irritate me, creating arguments, and tried to get under my skin at every step. Becca hardly noticed my existence. When I tried to explain their conduct to my dad, he didn't believe me as they behaved very differently with him. He felt I was exaggerating and that they simply needed time to get used to me returning home. After some time, I stopped whining, as it was obvious nothing I said would make his opinion different. My priorities shifted to accumulating enough money to move out, and given Becca and Alexa were ruining my life, that couldn't occur fast enough. Then all of a sudden, everything started to go south. After spending the afternoon with friends, one day I arrived home to see my dad already there, clearly agitated. He advised me to start packing and head off. I surprised myself. He accused me of pilfering Alexa's college money when I inquired about his behavior. Startled and unsure of what he was talking about, he said that Becca had registered me as a secondary user on a credit card she was saving for Alexa's education, and that I had allegedly emptied the account, spending the money on luxury goods such as designer bags and outfits. I stared in shock. Not 1 inch of it was accurate. Becca said I had visited her a few weeks earlier, explaining I was low on money, hence she had presumably added me to Alexa's account. She then added, I then went on a shopping spree, spending thousands of dollars. According to my dad, they discovered the stuff under my bed after previously looking through my room earlier. I got enraged. I had not touched their money, much less made purchases of luxury goods. Becca was lying. I informed my dad, and I had never even mentioned being added to the card. He disagreed. Becca said she took me off the card after learning about questionable activities in an early morning bank call. My dad flatly refused to check with the bank or validate the narrative and did not pay attention to anything I said. He agreed with everything Becca stated and had already decided I was a burglar. I made a case, but it was useless. That same evening, he booted me, and I left the house I had grown up in sad and betrayed. I did not speak with my father after that day. I knew exactly where his priorities were, and following his behavior, I never wanted to talk to him once more. Before settling into my own apartment, I stayed with a friend for a few days. Though the first few months were difficult financially, I finally recovered. I lead a decent life for myself. I have no want to see my dad again and have avoided every family celebration on his side for the past 8 years. I have only really maintained in touch with my mother, who likewise cut off relations with him following the event. Recently, though, my dad popped up at my place out of the blue, claiming he wanted to apologize. Apparently, he had recently learned Becca had created a whole scenario out of nothing. She had set me up so that once Alexa emptied the initial money with her ostentatious spending, my dad would cover her college costs. To sell the tale, Becca had even gone so far as to have her parents pose as bank staff members. According to my dad, he came clean about everything after Becca had a falling off with her parents. Now divorcing Becca, he wanted to be reconciled with me. Hoping I could approach one of my friends, whose father is a well-known attorney, for a favor, he requested my aid in contacting decent divorce counsel. I lost it. Not only had it taken him 8 years to forgive, but he came here mostly because he needed something from me. The arrogance amazed me. Telling him I was not very interested in assisting him, I closed the door in his face. I was not about to help clean up the mess he had produced. When my mom called later, I assumed she would be encouraging. She instead attacked my choice, reminding me that everyone makes errors and that I have to pardon my dad and support him. What I was hearing stunned me. I was furious because my dad had chosen Becca over me, his own daughter, and had shown me no sympathy during the process, not because he trusted the wrong person. He booted me out without even allowing me an opportunity to defend myself and had called me nasty things. And now, not just to atone, but also to seek for my help, after all this time. My mother didn't see my side of things when I told her. She persisted in saying that my dad had corrected his error and that I needed to be the more moral person forgiving him. Still, it was not quite straightforward. From what I could see, he wouldn't have gone to apologize at all if he hadn't needed anything from me. I'm left wondering if I made the correct choice because my mom and I stopped the discussion on negative terms. Was my mother wrong for standing up for my dad after all that occurred? Or did I overact by not helping him? That day, after closing the door on my dad, I was boiling. The idea that he believed popping up out of nowhere, apologizing, and then immediately requesting a favor would somehow make all the difference seemed incomprehensible. I hadn't heard from him for 8 years, not a single apology, and here he was behaving as though nothing had happened, as father and daughter would have us do. The whole circumstance tasted foul in my tongue. But the way my mother responded really got to me. She had been in my lap for years, consenting that my dad had seriously messed up. She had severed relations with him the same way I did, and I assumed we had the same view on the degree of his damage to me. It thus seemed like a betrayal when she began prodding me to forgive him. She was defending him now, claiming he was just like everyone else and that he made errors like everyone else. But to me, this was more than just a little error. He had decided to accept Becca's falsehoods instead of his own daughter, labeled me as a thief, and tossed me out of his house with no thought. Suddenly, my mom wanted me to be the larger person, to let it go and support him through his divorce. Her rapid shift of opinion eluded me as to why. Everything I knew about her, about how she had my back, felt to be collapsing. I attempted to convey to her that the problem was not just his mistake, but also his treatment of me. That is, his total disdain of who I was and what I meant to him. She seemed to lack it, though we wound up circling for a good half hour, debating. She said that it was better late than never, and that my dad was now attempting to right things. I continued reminding her that if the only reason he was getting in touch was to ask for my assistance, his apologies meant little. We hung up without fixing anything at last, both extremely annoyed. That dialogue absolutely rocked me. My mother had always been the one I felt I could count on, and suddenly it appeared like she was supporting my dad for reasons I couldn't grasp. I found myself obsessing over it throughout the following few days. Trying to understand why her mother was acting this way, I repeatedly went back over the discussion in my thoughts. It had no logic, and the more I considered it, the more offended I became. Not only had my dad tried to crawl his way back into my life in the most selfish manner, but now I was losing my mom too, or at least it felt that way. I began to wonder whether perhaps I had overreacted. Right? My dad had apologized, admitted he had been mistaken, he had come all the way to my house and begged pardon. Then I would remind myself of what he had gone through, 8 years of silence based on a falsehood, all because he had not trusted me. Not only that, but the way he had denigrated me, called me names, and thrown me out without even hearing my side of the story. I couldn't readily forgive that, and the fact that he only came to apologize because he wanted my aid made everything seem so fake. A few days following the disagreement with my mother, I realized I needed some time apart from both of them. After the way my mother had been acting, I wasn't sure I wanted to talk to her either. I wasn't ready to chat to my dad either. I reasoned that some distance would provide me time to get clear-headed and make decisions about what to do next. I so neglected to contact either of them, and instead concentrated on my life, my job, and my friends. My mother got back to me quickly once more. A few days later, she texted me, asking whether she might visit to chat. She stated she wanted to have a calm conversation personally and clear the air. I consented, believing that perhaps she was at last prepared to pay attention to what I had to say and that we might sort things out. I hoped when she arrived. This seemed to be the turning point when we may at last grasp one another. She began by stating she recognized she might not have been trying hard enough to see things from my point of view and that she had considered our previous chat extensively. It sounded like a good start, so I opened out to her once again, outlining why I couldn't simply forgive my dad so readily and why I was so offended by what he had done. I told her how profoundly that had affected me and how questioning my value to him as a daughter had come from being booted out like that. She didn't apologize or recognize my emotions the way I had hoped, though, once I finished explaining. Rather, she added, she wanted me to have the same discussion with my dad now that we had worked it out. She felt I owed him an explanation and that if I could simply sit down with him and chat like I did with her, things may mend between us. She claimed my dad deserved to hear my side of the tale and that, despite his belief the worst of me, he hadn't contacted the police or taken legal action, thus displaying some sort of kindness. What I was hearing astounded me. She seemed to have entirely missed the purpose of what I had said. Sitting down with my dad and revisiting all of that with him piqued no appeal to me. He did not merit such talk, in my opinion. 8 years ago, he booted me out and made his decision. Today, just because he recognized he had been wrong, didn't mean I was ready to give him another opportunity. Saying that I had no forgiveness left for him, I informed her that she wouldn't know me as well as she thought if she could not grasp that. Though I was enraged, I maintained composure by keeping a quiet voice. I told her I wanted to stop talking about this and that she should drop it if she wanted to keep chatting with me. That marked a change in direction. She began squirming, seeming uneasy, and at last said she had promised my dad she would get me to chat with him. She stated this is why she was truly there and that she couldn't go unless I agreed to at least see him once. She stated she had to live up to her vow and that it was vital to her since she wanted to lose neither my dad nor me. What I was hearing defied belief. She had not come to comprehend my emotions or listen to me. Like my dad, she came to control me into performing what she desired. That was the last straw. I lost my cool and began screaming at her, telling her I was done with both of them, that she was a horrible mother. She began to weep, but I didn't give a damn at that point. She should go and not come back till she was ready to apologize, I advised her. She repeated apologizing for the circumstances, but I knew she didn't mean it. She was merely sad she couldn't get me to do as she wanted. She went at last, but not before telling me that my dad had been sitting in the car the entire time, expecting to be summoned inside. More fighting followed. I was enraged beyond words. She had violated my confidence by bringing him here knowing how I felt. I warned her I would contact the police should they ever show up at my place once more. Then, just as I had done with my dad, I blocked her number. I was at that point done. I wanted never to hear from one of them ever again. I began considering if I should pursue legal action to guard against them, perhaps even obtaining a restraining order should they continue to call me. After all they had put me through, I was not going to let them destroy their way back into my life. I craved serenity, and I would have done everything to keep them out of my life. After I blocked my mother a few weeks ago, things were at last beginning to settle down. Her or my dad didn't get back to me, and I started to feel as though I may at last go on. Having some distance from the chaos that had been the whole circumstance comforted me. But something even more bizarre occurred. Just as I felt I was finished with all the family strife. For me, it was a usual day off, and I was at home leisurely savoring the quiet. I had not intended to be too active, perhaps only a relaxing day on the couch viewing TV. Then I heard someone knock at my door. Nobody was expected, so when I peeped through the glass, Becca and Alexa surprised me. My blood turned hot right away. Having gone through all that, they had the arrogance to show up at my house? Though curiosity won me over, I almost closed the door. I told them to go after opening the door just a little bit. I even carried my phone with me, prepared to call the police should they not go away. But Becca, with her customary haughtiness, said she was not there to torment me. She asserted she was there to explain why my mom had suddenly sided with my dad and tell me the truth about him. I wanted no hearing of it. Giving her the gratification of thinking I cared about whatever she had to say was last what I wanted. She then said, nevertheless, that what she had to tell me would fully explain my mother's unusual conduct. That drew my interest. After years of supporting my mom, I had been wondering why she had changed so suddenly. I hesitated, then agreed to listen, but I made it plain I wasn't allowing her in. She stood at the door, Alexa just behind her, looking, as always, apathetic. Becca began by relating to me the major argument she had with her parents a few weeks earlier. Apparently, it exceeded financial means. She stopped writing her parents the monthly checks she used to send them when her dad slashed her allowance. When Becca's parents discovered my dad had been sending her less money, they chose to tell him the truth about what had happened 8 years ago. The fact I had been set up for theft of Alexa's education fund. At last, they acknowledged that they had assisted Becca in faking the entire event in order to eliminate me and ensure Alexa's dad's financial backing. Their marriage began to disintegrate when my dad confronted Becca upon learning. Having been battling non-stop, my dad had filed for divorce upon discovering all the falsehoods. The worst part is that Becca had been looking about herself and found that my dad had been seeing none other than my mom. Apparently, my mom had been suddenly pressing me to forgive him, and because she had been so adamant about my talking to him, my dad and mom had been in touch for months, which explained why Becca said my dad had been gathering money, getting ready to leave her, and arranging to see my mom after the divorce was official. Becca had been exploring on her own and arguing with her parents as a result. She intended to remain in the marriage long enough to file for divorce on her own terms and maximize her income from the settlement. But all collapsed after the reality of the pilfer's college fund surfaced. Now involved in a violent divorce fight, Becca and my dad had discovered the truth about each other's deceptions. Standing there, I was somewhat surprised. Now it all made sense. Why my mom had been urging me to forgive him, why she had suddenly reunited with my dad, and why she was so eager for me to talk with him. She had been in on it the entire time, most likely trying to see him once Becca was gone from sight. Not caring how much it harmed me in the process, my mom, the one person I felt I could trust, had been working behind the scenes attempting to solve her own problem. Becca seemed not very bothered about the fact she was spewing all this personal garbage. Her one concern was making sure I refrained from assisting my dad through his divorce. She said that if I did, she would be left with nothing, as my dad had threatened her, claiming I was going to link him with a prominent divorce attorney. He was clearly lying, but Becca came to me to make sure I wouldn't assist him, as she wanted no risk. The degree of craziness this entire affair had become seemed unbelievable. My mom was somehow involved, my dad was threatening his soon-to-be ex-wife. Now Becca, the woman who had tried to wreck my life 8 years before, was requesting a favor. Though I was enraged, I really appreciated Becca coming to tell me the truth. At least right now I understood exactly what was happening behind the scenes. My parents didn't care how it affected me. They were controlling me for their own self-serving needs. Becca departed with Alexa, stating it was up to me whether I wanted to help my dad or not after finishing out her story to me. I felt for the first time in years somewhat clear. At last, I knew why my dad had come crawling back into my life and why my mom had been acting so unusual. I wasn't going to let them play their disorganized game using me as a pawn. I sat down and went over everything once Becca and Alexa left. Yes, I was furious, but more than that, I was done. I finished with my mom and dad both. There was no going back from any of their distinct betrayals of me. Though I had already shut my dad out of my life, I now realized I had to do the same with my mother. Though difficult, I couldn't allow any of them to pull me back into their poisonous quagmire. Like with my dad, the next day I blocked my mom's phone. The two persons meant to be my parents, those who were supposed to love and guard me, had exploited me like this, and it astounded me. Not because she felt it was the proper thing for me, but rather because it would help her. My mother had tried to shame me into forgiving my dad. From now on, I resolved that I was going to live for myself. I never needed them. I was glad I had created a life of my own, free from their backing. I was not going to allow their lies and manipulation to destroy that. I was totally finished with both of them going ahead. Since I broke off both of my parents a few months ago, honestly, life has been a lot quieter. It took me some time to truly come to grips with everything that transpired, especially the betrayal from my mom. but once I decided to cut both of them off, it felt like a great weight had been taken off my shoulders. I will not lie. I still have times when I miss my mother. She was, after all, the one family member I had truly kept close to following things with my dad. Completely turning away someone who had been so important in your life is difficult. Then I remember her attempts to control me, urging me to forgive my dad, not out of sympathy for me, but more because it suited her own interests. That helps one to deal with her absence. A few distant relatives told me that the divorce of my dad was finalized a few weeks ago. To be honest, I find it not surprising that he lost rather a lot in the settlement. Becca is the kind to make every dollar she can out of a given circumstance count. Neither do I know the whole specifics, nor am inclined to ask. I've kicked myself off that entire side of the family. Some relatives even validated all Becca had told me by telling me my dad and mom are back together today. Indeed, it's ridiculous. They have found their way back to one another after all these years. Honestly, they deserve one another. When my dad and mom said they were going to remarry, the household buzzed with activity. A couple cousins contacted me, suggesting I should make things right and show up for the wedding. They behaved as though this was some major reunion when I could at last make peace with my folks and all would be okay. I do not, however, want to mend anything with them or go to their wedding. One cannot restore what they did to me with a grin and a wave at some family gathering. Now, comma. I know I am better off living alone. I have developed a life for myself over the years that I'm glad of. Without their help, I had survived some quite difficult circumstances. Thus, I came out stronger. I never really understood until recently the freedom that results from eliminating poisonous individuals from your life. Though difficult, it also releases something. I feel as though I am really living for myself for the first time in a very long period. On days when I wondered if I was acting morally, even if they have injured you, it is difficult to distance yourself from someone you have been trained to think that family is everything. There were times when I questioned if I should have given them another opportunity or whether I should have been the greater person my mother kept urging. Every time those questions surfaced, though, I recalled all the suffering they brought about, how fast my dad turned his back on me when I most needed him, and how my mother tried to exploit my sensitivity to her benefit. I know I acted in the correct manner. It's not about grudges or small-town politics. It's about shielding myself from those who have shown themselves to not be motivated by my best interests. Years passed for my dad and mother to right things, and they decided not to. They just contacted me when they wanted anything. That is not love. Most definitely not family. Regarding Becca and Alexa, I have not heard from them since the day they came up at my house. Strong riddance. I don't need them in my life, and I'm happy Becca's finally out of Dad's life too after everything she did to undermine me. Alexa asks. She is simply another victim of her mother's plans, so really I feel a bit guilty for her. She chose none of this, yet she was dragged into it exactly as I was. Though that's her road to find out, I hope she can go on from it all. I am now excited about the future. Though I had long dreamed about owning my own property, I am now accumulating money for that purchase as I am doing well at work. Through all of this, my friends have been my true family. They have helped me in ways my parents never could. Family does not have to be blood, I have discovered. These are the folks who show up for you, who support you through difficult times, and who really concern your welfare. Knowing that I have created this life for myself makes one rather powerful. I am not the terrified, perplexed person I was 8 years ago, pushed out of my dad's house over lies and manipulation. Now I am wiser, stronger, and far more conscious of my own value. Their approval or acceptance is not what I need. Enough for me on my own. I have also begun to let the resentment go. I had hatred toward my parents for a long time, and although I believe it was reasonable, I have come to see that clinging to that hate was only serving to harm me. Although I have to go past it so I can completely concentrate on the life I am making for myself, I do not need to pardon what they did. I am hence, right now. Free from the poisonous influence of my parents, I turned first toward my own pleasure and, at last, at peace with the decisions I have taken. Though it's not a simple road, I'm pleased I traveled it. Though most people never consider cutting connections with family as something they have to do, Occasionally, it is required for your own mental and emotional health. The future excites me. The past no longer drags me down. All that counts is that I know I have made the appropriate choices for me. It is no longer my issue what happens with my parents going ahead. The most liberating thing of all is that I am living my life on my terms right now. And that brings us to the finish. I appreciate everyone who listened to my narrative and provided comments throughout. Although the trip has been wild, it has strengthened me. I will be regretless moving ahead.